Pace 1119. This is an interesting one. This particular one was first written in 1989. It was revised a little bit later, but I don't think it was significantly revised. And so it's a little humorous because a lot of the resources that they mention you probably don't have at your school or even at your public library anymore. And you're probably more familiar with just doing Google searches and using online resources and Wikipedia and things like that. And then they even talk about at the library using a card catalog. Now, I'm old enough that I remember in high school and in college actually using a title card and an author card and a subject card, and it was a very long and tedious process that librarians had to go through when they had to put a new book into the system compared to the computer-based systems that probably every library has today. But they haven't significantly revised this pace, so I just recommend the students work through it. Some of it will almost be like a little history lesson of how your parents and grandparents would have done research and can make you appreciate the online resources that you have available today. But still answer the questions, and there are some content things that you do need to know. They talk about on page 3 and 4, here's the card catalog, and they talk about these different cards, the title card, the author card, the subject card. Again, that's rather outdated, but I want to draw your attention to, as you're doing this, the numbers and the letters, because books in the library actually are still organized in this way. So the Dewey Decimal System is still a valid system and libraries use it, so become familiar with that. And just being familiar with, the title, the author, the parts, the page number, the publisher, things like that. Nothing wrong with that. When you get to page 5, and we have these categories of numbers for the Dewey Decimal System. And let me just give you a tip here. I think it's, if you have downloaded the test tips for your courses from pacesuccess.com, I think there is a test tip that reminds you that you need to know this pretty well, okay? And it's on the PACE test, and it's not reviewed on the self-test, and it's only a little bit on the checkup, but you need to know these categories and which numbers they go with. So what some students have done is take the first letter of each of these keywords and maybe make up a funny sentence that helps them just remember the sequence, and then they number it, 100 down through 900, and then they can remember it, and that'll help you with the matching section on the PACE test. All right, let's see here. The next thing I want to draw to your attention is, okay, so they talk about how to use the reference system in the library. Okay, that is current, that's good to know. They talk about dictionary skills, and even though you might use an online dictionary, I think it is wise to get familiar with the actual book and to know the different parts. But even on the online dictionaries, you'll see the pronunciation of words, the part of speech, how the word is pronounced, and then underneath that or coming after that, you should see definitions for that word. And there might be several definitions for a given word. And then even after that, depending on the dictionary, it may tell you the language from which it's derived and the root word in that language. So those are all important things, and you can answer the questions on page 10 just by looking at the diagram of a dictionary here on page 9. Then it talks about an encyclopedia on page 13. I don't know if your school has one. We still have one that our students can access, and I encourage them to grab a couple volumes, look through it. It is interesting to read it in text. See, there's pictures and explaining events. The key difference between Wikipedia and an encyclopedia is that an encyclopedia has been written by authors who, for the most part, have good reputations of being very knowledgeable in their subject area. Now, you're still going to find things that are not true, like science articles will include, millions and millions of years, things like that. And we just have to read and understand. You have a little critical thinking there to know that that's not true. But for the most part, they're true, and trying to be as careful and fact-checking as possible. That's not necessarily the case with Wikipedia. Wikipedia, actually, people all around the world can add their own content into a Wikipedia article on a given subject. And they may or may not be experts, and they may not have footnotes, and they just throw in some of their own opinion, or sometimes they actually add false information. I do remember a story here a few years ago where somebody died, a famous person had died, I think he was an author of some type, and a college student wrote a poem and inserted it into Wikipedia as if it was something that this author had written foreshadowing his own death. And lots of news media services went to Wikipedia to research this person, took that poem and published it. And then it came out that that was not something he had written and that was false information. And really that college student had done that on purpose to illustrate how uncareful people often are in using Wikipedia and trusting that as a source of truth and knowledge. So we've got to be careful with Wikipedia. There are other online sources that might be more. All right, then it talks about an atlas. Hopefully you have one in your learning center. Of course, Google Earth has some interesting resources along that line, but Concordance, Bible Atlas, Bible Handbook, there's a lot of other things in here that are valuable. There's one more section here I wanted to point out. Okay, you are going to have to write some note cards, get some practice doing that. Oh, I don't see it in here. Okay, maybe it's in another piece where it talks about the guide, the reader's guide to periodic literature. And if it does, maybe it's in here somewhere and I missed it. But that is before the computers were available and the internet for taking every article in magazines and having a database so that you can search for topics. Everything had to be typed up and put in a series of books, and every month a new book would be published. And magazine articles, you would have to search month by month and year by year to find particular topics, and then go back and try to find those magazines in the stacks, as it's called, in the back of the library, if you wanted to read that article. So things have changed dramatically since then, and most articles are available online and available through online searching. So this is in preparation for writing a research paper that you're going to be doing, and so this kind of lays the groundwork, and we'll see you when you get to the next page, 1120.